Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of our CGL Fireside Chat. Welcome to our audiences locally in Europe and around the world. Again, we're taking advantage of these very extraordinary times, obviously extraordinary challenges, but also extraordinary opportunities. And tonight we are very happy, we are honored and privileged to have with us a guest, Sir Martin Sorrell, who needs very little introduction. However,
you should stop there. Stop there then.
So for those of you who do not know him, he's well known for building the world's largest advertising and marketing company, making him one of the most recognized businessmen on the planet, not to mention one of Time's 100 most influential people. So Martin, if I get anything wrong, I'm sure you'll correct me. For more than 30 years.
It's all wrong, you're a schmoozer, you're a schmoozer.
Sorrell, 75, presided over WPP, the global empire he founded in 1985, before resigning in 2018. He grew it from a 1 million shell company, I believe, into the world's largest advertising and marketing service powerhouse, with profits of approximately £2 billion. He is at it again, never gives up, never stops, with S4 Capital, the company he set up shortly after leaving WPP. And as he said on many occasions, the S4 Capital's mission is to disrupt the old advertising paradigm and build a new age, new era advertising and marketing service model. So Martin, how do I do so well? How do I do so far?
Very Talmudic, very Talmudic. Brilliant.
Thank you, thank you. That's the ultimate compliment. We'll get to that later, I'm sure. So this evening, I just want to get straight into it. And as we were talking before, so Martin, you've dealt with challenges, problems, crises in the past. And my question to you is, the opening question is, what about the current crisis worries you the most? And what gives you the most hope?
Well, what worries me is simple. It's tragically simple. Is the results of the pandemic. I mean, the angst and grief that it's caused to people and their families and their friends and their colleagues and their families too. I mean, that is the tragedy of it. I think what the death toll, to put it crudely, is something like 250,000 people already. Although, you know, it's interesting to look back at history when the pandemic started, or when it wasn't a pandemic, when it was an epidemic started. I Googled what were the comparisons for Asian flu or SARS or HIV. HIV, according to Google, when I looked at it a few months ago, 36 million people died. The flu epidemics, the Asian flu, SARS, 1 to 2 million. So I don't know, tragically, whether we get up to that level when all is said and done with COVID-19 or the coronavirus. But, you know, if you put it in perspective, maybe it will be the same, but it sounds sort of similar to some of the things we've seen before. But the nature of the virus and its contagious nature make it much more poisonous and much nastier. So the worst thing is the death toll, the people who are ill, and it affects, you know, you kindly said, Joseph, that I was 75. So I'm in the vulnerable category. I'm on the scrap heap with all those over 70s who are locked up during this pandemic, and even after this pandemic, when the Prime Minister goes on TV on Sunday, which I read he probably will be, to start easing the lockdown, I've no doubt that I will be told to stay at home or take special precautions. So I'm part of that Darwinian cull that is taking place, not only of companies but of people. So that's the worst thing. The best thing, if there is a best thing, I mean, apart from the impact that I think it will have on our business at S4, and you know, I wouldn't miss out an opportunity to draw that comparison. apart from that, because digital transformation will accelerate in all its, at the consumer level, at the media level, and at the producer level, the best thing is, I think, that the energy, and it has not been cooperative energy internationally. I mean, one of the problems that we're facing now is what others have described as self-sufficiency or nationalism. And it's, we've seen the populist surges because of inequality, basically. I mean, the capitalist system has created very significant inequalities that are driving, I think, a lot of the political movements. But the downside of what's been happening recently is the deglobalization and the increasing nationalization, or the national self-sufficiency. But what's happened is really interesting, that a lot of energy has been unleashed in private companies, in partnerships, some countries getting together to help one another. Not enough, in my view, and not enough in most people's view. But the best thing that will come out of this is the energy and intelligence and thoughtfulness and reforms and inventions that will be created by people as a result of the pressure from the virus. So and I think we underestimate that. I'm bullish about the recovery. I'm a V-shaped, or to be more conservative, a reverse square root, if you can figure that one out. So, sharp downward move, sharp upward move, maybe not perhaps back to the level we were before, but that V shape in some sectors is not going to be every sector. That V shape in some sectors will be driven by human intelligence and effort and ingenuity. So when you look at Silicon Valley, when you look at Boston, when you look at Silicon Fen, when you look at Bangalore, when you look at Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, all these places where tech, is on fire, not literally, but in terms of development, I think there's a lot there that we will benefit from. Healthcare reforms, technology reforms. So I think the way we educate our children, the way we shop online, the way we communicate is going to be revolutionized by more rapidly by what we're going through now.
How has the crisis impacted you both on a business level and, if I may ask, on a personal level too?
Well, at a business level, you'll see your results for the first quarter of this year. We're a listed company here in London. You'll see the results tomorrow for yourself. I mean, for us, although there may be some short-term turbulence, as there is for most people, the turbulence that we face is less. I think, given the fact we're a purely digital company, it's less than others face. But in the long term, the good news for us from the COVID exercise, or the COVID threat, is that digital will accelerate, or the digital transformation will accelerate, and we will benefit in the long run. I mean, the short term, there is turbulence, but as I say, less so. So from a business point of view, it really isn't that, I'm going to say, that bad. And obviously, one death is more than one should accept. So 250,000 and up is totally unacceptable. So at a business level, the impact has been very interesting. It's thrown out a number of opportunities for us. That's number one. At a personal level, obviously, disruption. A journalist wrote to me today and said, as the lockdown is finishing, and I wrote back and said, what are you talking about? That, as far as I'm concerned, the lockdown hasn't finished. But if it were to, she asked me, what is the biggest change from a personal point of view of being locked up at home, which is where I am in London. And I said, well, to me, it was the same thing. We just moved the office to home, and I get up in the morning at 8 o'clock and I finish, with you. I've got a call now, and let's say an hour or so, and then after we finish, our Mighty Hive company, which is our data and analytics and programmatic company within S4, has a session with a number of clients in New York, and I'll start that at about 10 o'clock at night. So, and we've got our results tomorrow morning. So life is as busy as it now, from a personal point of view, as it was before. Less travel, which is a good thing. I'm more organized, probably. I'm more efficient. I spend less time having breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which is not just good for my waistline, but good, I think, from a time point of view. And the most precious asset we have is the time we have, and how we allocate that time, between family, business or career, and society. Those three areas, that's the critical thing to work out. And I think what COVID-19 has done for me is made me think much more rationally about that, and to think more about it, and after we come out of this, or as we come out of it, I think, I will ration my time much more effectively, and maybe be a bit more balanced, because I think people, those three areas that I mentioned, often people get two right, but they very rarely get three right. I mean, may know, Joseph, lots of people who manage to get the balance between those three things right. I know very few. And so trying to balance all those things in the right way is critically important. And I think COVID-19, from a personal point of view, has sort of encouraged me, in inverted commas, to think about it much more seriously.
We've spoken before about, you're dealing with challenges and situations in the past. Obviously, this is a crisis, you could call it a black swan. People did not.
It is a black swan. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody at Davos, which I went to in January. I actually checked with the organizer. There were 2 sessions on. This is the end of January, so you've got this French case, patient 0 in France, who they now say caught it in December. They don't know from where, but he caught it maybe from his wife, who worked in a supermarket or wet market or market close to Orly Airport. Or Charles de Gaulle Airport. But end of January, there were only 2 sessions at Davos that talked about pandemics or viruses. Wuhan was on the agenda, and there were people from Wuhan in Davos, but all the commentary on the virus was coming out of Wuhan. It wasn't coming out of Davos. So, here the great and good all together, and nobody saw this coming. I think Niall Ferguson would claim, the historian would claim that I think he did actually write a memo to his clients at Greenmantle around about January the 26th, calling out how serious this pandemic or this epidemic or virus could become. But nobody saw it coming, Joseph, so it was a black swan. And the important point, I think, here is we were totally underprepared. Governments were underprepared. I mean, I read this fascinating fact, that the Singapore government, one of the reasons why they had managed the virus so effectively, is they took the British plan, which was in place 2015, 2016, but which the British government had abandoned because of austerity, because the scientists or the advisors to the British government are saying the biggest threat that we have is not cyber, not climate change, not terrorism, it's a pandemic. So similar to Bill Gates at at TechCrunch, wherever it was in 2015, and what the British government did was abandon it because of austerity. The Singapore government picked it up. So it's quite clear from the statistics. You look at Germany and the number of deaths, 6,000. You look at the UK and we've surpassed Italy here in Europe a day or so ago. It's quite clear that we were totally unprepared for this, despite the fact that the experts, many of them, said this is a risk that we should think. So again, a lesson from this is about risk analysis, not just business, but personally too. How do you figure out what those black swans could be?
Yes, indeed. I think it was Donald Rumsfeld who coined it as the unknown unknowns.
That's exactly. That's right.
That tend to get us. So we mentioned before, obviously, there have been different sorts of crises in the past. How would you compare this crisis? How is it different than, let's say, the financial crisis in 2008 or the dot-com crash in 2000?
This is the Manish Tana question, isn't it? Why is this?
You took the words out of my mouth.
Why is this recession or this virus different to any other virus? Well, this recession is different to any other thing. I mean, I was born in 1945, February the 14th, 1945. I popped my head out of the womb, and so I didn't know war, or I arrived just at the end of the war. Certainly, the great financial crisis of '08, in my view, is different. Not as all-embracing. That was a financial crisis. 9/11 was different because it impacted things globally, but it was more narrow in its impact. 2001-2 dot-com bust was global, but a financial crisis. At 91-2 financial crisis, even the oil price bubbles, oil price crises of the 70s and 80s, which you're too young to remember, were different. This is as near as you can get, in my view, to war. It is wartime. It's a silent war, and it's a silent enemy, but a deadly silent enemy. And I think, therefore, you can't compare it to what went on. And the other thing about this crisis or recession, which is different, is the warp speed at which it occurred. So if you look at what happened in the initial fall in the stock markets, they happened in, depending on which index you're looking at, 23, 25, 28 days. We haven't seen a fall and indeed a rise, because we saw the markets recover quite significantly. Not all of it, but probably 2/3 of the recovery, 2/3 of the fall was recovered. But this all happened in warp speed, in very fast. So that's one of the reasons why I'm V-shaped as well, is I think the reverse reaction to this will be an upward shift of equal volatility and virility, if you like. Now, why is it's so fast? Well, it could be, I don't know, I'm not an expert in this area, and you'll have perhaps some people on in the future who are really expert in trading and stock markets who can explain it. But it seems to me that a lot of this is because a lot of trading now is driven by algorithms and machines, and therefore the reaction of the market are programmed and accelerate as a result. So I would say two things. Firstly, this is not like any other night or any other recession. This is different. This is like war. And secondly, it has happened at an incredible speed. And I think that has, I was listening to Ray Dalio on a webinar that he did with Meliodas at JP Morgan last night. And he said, when you get policy reaction quickly, the damage is less. So, if you went back to the Great Recession, it took 3 or 4 years, from 29 to 33 to get FDR on board. In 71, when he was referring to Nixon's, coming off the gold standard, again, policy reaction was later. In the great financial crisis, we took, it started September, October, I think it was March, when the fiscal stimulus and the monetary stimulus, or the monetary stimulus, was put into place. In this case, it's happened very quickly. And one of the good things that's happened in the short term, because I won't be around, but my kids and my grandkids and their kids will have to pay the price for this massive infusion. And one of the interesting thing, listening to a couple of Goldman analysts last Sunday, they made the point that the fiscal stimulus is so great in the United States, they're primarily talking about the US, but it applies elsewhere, that it covers the 30 million people who are unemployed or who've lost their jobs. It covers them. So you might get an increase in the savings rate in the short term in America. It might go up by 8% or whatever it is in April. But ultimately, that purchasing power will reflate and may inflate, some people believe, the economy. So short-term benefit, long-term, there's a big question. But net, this is very different to any other recession that I've seen anyway.
Let's go back a few years. Let's start at the beginning. 30 years ago, you built something, you created something that ultimately was huge. WPP. If you can talk a little about how you started that, and also a little about how you then went on to start again with S4 Capital.
Well, yeah, starting WPP, I was 40 years old. My dad had said to me, yeah, his advice to me had been, you find an industry that you enjoy, find a company within that industry you enjoy working, and build a reputation. Not a reputation that Joseph would interview you on the Center for Jewish Life, but a reputation where people had confidence in what you can do. And then if you feel at some point in time, I think he actually said to me when I was late 30s or 40, want to start something on your own. I mean, my father had always worked. He came from the East End of London, from Stepney. He went to a school, Mile End Central. Met my mother there, I think, when my mother was 13 and he was 14, and they were happily married until their dying day. And but from poor beginnings, had to go out from school at the age of 13 to earn a living, because I think it was one of 6, and they had to be income producing units. But he always worked for somebody else, and I think he always he ran a very big 750 stores, radio and television stores in the UK, so it would be equivalent to Dixon's, that was, or Carphone Warehouse in a way, but it was the biggest radio and TV business, but it wasn't his own. And I think he always, when he gave me that advice, wanted me to try and do something, quotes unquote, on my own. I mean, you're never on your own. You're always dependent on somebody, on people or whatever. So you're never isolated. So when I joined, I was very fortunate. It was luck. I met the Saatchi brothers. I was working for James Gulliver, who was a famous food retailer, worked for Garfield Weston and built up Fine Fare, and then built up Argyle Foods, sold Argyle Foods to RCA Corporation, which didn't make any sense at the time and proved not to make much sense over history. But he took his money and invested in a number of things, and I became his personal financial advisor, so-called. I was really his gopher, carrying his bag. And one of his investments was in an advertising agency called Garland Compton. And the chairman of Garland Compton was worried about the future of the agency, and Saatchi, Morris and Charles, reversed themselves into Garland Compton, which was a publicly quoted company. And I was working for James Gulliver. James knew Ken Gill, the chairman, and got to know the brothers, and I was an advisor. So I got to know about the advertising industry through Morris, and I was CFO in Morris and Charles. Great years of my life. I still think Saatchi in its early days was as good as it gets. It was a wonderful place to work. Nothing was impossible. Nothing was impossible unless you got public credit for what you did. As long as you didn't get any public credit for what you did, it was fine. But you could do anything you liked at Saatchi's, as long as it made sense, obviously. But when I was 40 years old, that my advice from my father, and I built a bit of a reputation, not well known outside the firm, but inside the firm and in the industry and with investors. And I thought at the age of 40, I would give it a go. So together with a partner, I located a small shell company, which was called Wire and Plastic Products, which became WPP in time. And the rest is history. I bought a stake with my partner, 29.9% or close to that. And they issued new shares. We put some cash into the company. And as I say, the rest is history. So that was one thing. And then 33 years later, when I left WPP, I sort of thought again, I was 72, 73. I didn't want to retire. I didn't want to play golf. I didn't want to, I think the people who retire, if they have energy, lose it pretty fast. They sort of tend to vegetate. They either vegetate mentally or physically or both. And, I didn't want to, I enjoy the rough and tumble, if you like. I enjoy getting up early in the morning and going to bed late at night. And it's not just 5 days a week, it's 7 days a week, basically. And I enjoy it. And so coming back to that balancing, I am in balance towards the career part, if you like. And that's always been prominent. And so at the age of 72, 73, I decided I'll embark on a new enterprise. We had 4 principles, purely digital. I'm only interested in digital because that's where the growth is. You know, the growth rate historically has been 20% for digital, whereas traditional media is declining. Secondly, we focus on what we call the Holy Trinity. Forgive me for talking about the Holy Trinity for the CJL, but first-party data driving the development of digital advertising content and programmatic and data and analytics. Thirdly, faster, better, cheaper. That's our mantra, or speed, quality, value. So faster is about agility, because that's what you need, not just in normal times, but in COVID times in particular. Better means understanding the digital ecosystem. I won't bore you with the names of the 16 companies that we try and focus on, but there are about 16 companies: Tech, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba, TikTok, et al. Those, and cheaper means more efficiency. And then the fourth principle is a unitary structure. So we're not building what we did at WPP, which is a fragmented set of brands where it's about market share. What we're doing is trying to coalesce everything into one unit, which serves our clients most effectively. So I decided to do that, 2 years ago. We've been at it for about 18, 21 months. We have revenues of about $400 million, EBITDA going into COVID of about $100 million before central costs of about 13, so about 85, 90 million of EBITDA, and a market cap of $1.1 billion. So we've done that. I'm very proud of that. We have 2,500 people in 30 countries, and we've done it within 18, 21 months. So we are a unicorn, a dollar unicorn. We were a sterling unicorn before the market fell, but we're hovering at about 900 million pounds. So we've created a unicorn in under 2 years, which in the advertising and marketing services industry is probably unprecedented.
Look, it's remarkable. I mean, at that age, I don't know how many people would have gone on to start to build something again, but that's certainly inspirational, and I certainly take to it. We're born to work and to toil, and that keeps us healthy.
If we're going to live to 120 or 150, Joseph, I mean, 75 would be about halfway there, so you have to keep going.
I can tell you something. You're certainly aligned in your thinking with the views of the Lubavitch Rebbe, who encourage people to continue working always, never to retire. How would you say, what is the difference between the Sir Martin who started WPP and the Sir Martin who started S4?
I don't know. Somebody, an Indian journalist and a good friend, actually wrote to me. He sent me a picture of Steve Jobs, and with a quote from Steve Jobs saying, the best thing for him was when he was fired by Apple, and it released creativity and new ideas and relaxed him and whatever. So in a funny way, I mean, he said, I said, that isn't the case as far as I'm concerned. In many respects, in terms of the circumstances around Steve Jobs, or indeed what happened to him. But there is something in that. I mean, I'm freed from the shackles. I mean, I have to say it was mea culpa, because I was involved in, not alone, but in creating WPP from scratch. I mean, we started with 2 people in a room in Lincoln's Inn Fields, and by the time we finished, we had 200,000 people in 113 countries, and a market cap at the peak of 22 billion pounds. And when I left on the day I left, I think it was 16 billion pounds. So, we have seen, great growth. And I was involved in creating that, but we created, all companies, the average, according to McKinsey, the average company lasts in the S&P 500 or FTSE 100 about 17 years. That's the life of the company. And of course, the problem is you're always at risk of becoming an analog company, and you may think you're digital or in the vanguard, but there's always those 2 kids in a garage in Silicon Valley or Bangalore or Sao Paulo or Buenos Aires who might come up and I think the difference to your to answer your question head on is what Anand said to me when he wrote to me this morning, which was, you are freed from what I described in the annual report coming out tomorrow morning as, it's the difference between swallows and albatrosses. So that's probably a good analogy. So I think I feel more like a swallow now than the albatross that I was or that I had to manage. I think it is difficult. Running or trying to run an analog company is particularly, I think even post-COVID, it's going to get even tougher, Yossi. I mean, I think the challenges that people will have in trying to move a traditional company to, let's call it analog to digital or traditional to modern, the disintermediation, the cannibalization, the struggle, I always describe it's the cannibalization argument. If you don't eat your children, forgive me giving you this analogy, if you don't eat your children, somebody else will. And when you're running an established company, which has been very successful in the past, the danger is you look to the past and you're unwilling to change. And the great thing about COVID-19, if there are any great things about it, is it is the burning platform. It's the ultimate burning platform. Q2 is a bloodbath. Look at the banks. Their profits are halved, wiped out. I mean, really, most sectors, some sectors not doing too badly, tech, pharma, but by and large, travel, hospitality, wiped out. I think Airbnb, their revenues are halved. So you are seeing massive change. And I think that's the difference. So, a few years ago, I was focused more on analog and digital. Now I'm focused purely on digital.
So let's look a little forward, try to gain some visibility. When do you think, what's the time frame for the world getting back to quote unquote normal? And what do you think that new normal might look like, both the good and the bad?
Well, I don't think it's a normal. It's either a new or a next normal. I think it's a next normal. I said before, I'm in the bullish camp. I'm more in the V shape than the U shape. Certainly not the L shape. Maybe not even the W shape. I mean, there may be some. Well, not maybe. There probably will be ripples coming out of this. I mean, you see. As lockdowns ease, the virus coming back. You saw that in Singapore from migrant workers, but you saw it in Japan when the governor of Tokyo, announced again that there was emergency lockdown. So we will have alarms and excursions on this until we get a vaccine. And when we get a vaccine, most of the people I talk to from the healthcare industry talk about 12, 18 months. There are very few. I mean, I saw, which I showed you when we were prepping for this, a video from India, which a friend of mine in India sent me, of an announcement on one of the channels, usual hysteria on Indian news channels, that a vaccine had been developed in an Italian hospital in Rome. And, the presenter was screaming on the TV that, this was breaking news and incredible. We've heard nothing about it since. But look, I think it will be V-shaped, not in every vertical, but in many. Tech will certainly be much more vibrant. Life sciences, biosciences, pharma, e-commerce, gaming, all these areas, streaming, all these areas. And the reason is digital transformation is going to take much more rapidly at the three levels that I talked about. At the consumer level, after all, we're sitting at home, we're communicating online like we're doing here now, we're educating our kids like you are using technology at home. So online education will become even more important. And we're shopping online. 31% of households in America are shopping online for the first time, as compared to 19% in August of 2019. So you're getting tremendous trial, successful trial by people of all age groups. So inevitably, this is going to accelerate digital transformation. And the second area is media. Analog, the Jewish Chronicle has gone out of business. Founded, I think, in 1867. They went to a non-paper version during the coronavirus crisis, and they got knocked out. I got a note to say Jewish News is going to continue, but they were going to merge, and but that's an icon or a symbol of what's happening. There are a lot of newspapers that abandoned their paper versions during the crisis that will never come back. You've seen the pressure. ITV announced this morning their results. Their ad revenues in April are going to be down, I think it's 42%. So these are huge changes. Disney, look what's happened to Disney in its parks and cruises operation, in its free-to-air television operation. So media, principally newspapers and magazines, but also linear TV, free-to-air television is going to be put under even more pressure because of the streamers. Netflix, look at the Netflix statistics. Now, they qualified it by saying when we come out of lockdown, they'll lose some of their audience, but you've seen the new product introduction of Disney Plus, 50 million plus subscribers, must be the most successful new business launch or new product launch that we've seen for many, many years. So media will shift. Outdoor, I was looking at outdoor statistics this morning. Digital outdoor is up by 20%. Traditional outdoor down significantly. But even in the crisis, digital outdoor, I think it was in the US in the first quarter of the year, up 20%. So you'll see those differences. And then third, and most importantly, the people running big companies and medium-sized and small companies will embrace digital transformation far more rapidly than they've ever done before. And the reason is all bets are off now. They used to say, I'm not going to disrupt the company too much because we're doing okay. So why should I disrupt it? Before COVID, we had that trade war, or we still have, between China and the US. And that was causing some flutters. And then we had the Saudi-Russian oil production spat. But before, things were okay. The world was progressing at about 2, 3, or 4% GDP growth. There was no inflation, no pricing power. Clients looked at cost, but they managed to eke out 2, 3, or 4% growth. Now, so they didn't do digital disruption on a big scale because you didn't have to, and you could get along. Now it's very different. All bets are off. There is no status quo to disrupt. You just get on with it. So I think you are going to see very deep and violent, not physically violent, but in terms of implication, violent change in countries. So this is all going to change things, I think, quite rapidly. And that's why I come back to the V-shape. And then I come back to one other thing I said at the very beginning. This is going to unleash energy. And I was speaking to somebody on the West Coast, one of the big tech companies at a senior level this afternoon. And she said to me, she was talking about, she actually is part of the California Reconstruction Group that's working with the governor on reconstructing California after the lockdown. And she sits in the Silicon Valley, and she said, the energy, the knowledge, the nous, the money that you have, and in biotech and in tech, this is huge. And we don't, I don't think we fully comprehend how human beings can adjust to these sorts of adversities. And I don't think it's all bad news. I mean, it's terrible what's happened, but out of this will come some good, I think. And we'll see advances in technology and biosciences and life sciences, which I think will be absolutely incredible.
Well, let's focus a little on individuals, employees. And there are a lot of employees who are either employed in industries that may be affected by this, also young entrepreneurs. What advice would you give them?
Well, far be it from me to give advice. I can only talk from our experience. And you're saying for advice in the context of COVID-19 or what we've done or whatever?
Well, yeah, COVID-19 and obviously the
Well,
devastation.
well, I think, I said our fourth principle was to be a unitary company as opposed to a friendly. I mean, just in building S4, we've done 2 major transactions, and we've brought in 6 companies for one of the pillars, the content pillar that we have, and 3 for the programmatic and data and analytics pillar. And in all cases, in all 11 cases, we said to people, if you want to buy into our philosophy of creating a new age, new era advertising and marketing services company, join us. If you want to sell your company, go somewhere else. Go and talk to Accenture or WPP or whatever it happens to be. We're not interested in earnouts. If you want to join us, basically you can sell half of your company for cash, but the other half you come in with us and we build it together. So we're building a unitary company, one that works together as a unit, one P&L, to service clients in the most effective way. Now, one of the interesting things that's happened is, as a result of COVID, we become much more of a unified company. I mean, we're communicating. So one of the pieces of advice, it's not even advice, one of the things that we've done, which people may learn from, is we've communicated like crazy. We've over-communicated. You can't communicate enough. It's a truism. So this will be me with every one of our 2,500 people I write to them, email them every week. Our 2 major pillars around content, Media Monks, and programmatic and data analytics, Mighty Hive, they communicate to their people. So we're communicating all, and what we're communicating is really important. And it's 2 things. One is, I'm saying to people, look, this is very tough and this is very difficult, and we're calling it as it is. We don't gild the lily, varnish the truth. We lay it out as it is. We don't BS. And we describe to people, if there are tough things to be done, we do them, and we have to do them. And it's regrettable, but we're doing this for the health and welfare of everybody. So that's, you lay out what you have to do, but at the same time, you have to give people some vision or some hope for the future. There's no good saying, like Chicken Little, the sky is falling. You have to say, look, this is where we are, and this is how we're going to get out of it. Or this, and I'm not saying it's sunny uplands. I'm not saying that, but I believe that in Q2 of this year, it'll be awful. We already see that. We're 1 month through Q2. In Q3, it'll get relatively, and I underline relatively better. And in Q4, it'll get relatively better. And then 2021 will move even further ahead. So you have to lay out to people. And then from our point of view, what I've told you is, I think that digital transformation will accelerate at those 3 levels: consumer, media, and enterprise. And that is the vision for the future. And so I think that's really what you have to do. And I think those 2 things, we meet our management group, our senior management group, 8 people. We meet every day at 2:00. Some of us are in New York, Scottsdale, Denver, London, Amsterdam, Singapore. We meet and we talk about 3 things: people first, clients second, and finances third. And we talk about, liquidity, obviously, in the case of finances, making sure that we're well breached and we're not going to make any mistakes, certainly in the short term, and our balance sheet is strong. So those are the things that we've done. And I get a lot of email response and message response in relation to the communications of all sorts that we do, and people really appreciate it. And I don't want to bang on too long about it, but I participated in a Harvard Business School alumni session, 2,000 people on a call like this, using the HBS technology that they've developed, the electronic classroom, basically. And the case study that they had was the Chilean mining accident, where, if you remember, 77 miners were trapped underground. 33 miners were trapped underground, 700 meters down through impenetrable rock. And the president of Chile came out. He's advised by his advisors not to get near this thing, that it would damage him politically if he did. It was a private company that had this accident. Let them, let them go. Codelco, the state mining company, the president selected somebody, an outstanding executive, to run the rescue mission. The president comes out to the nation and he sets the mission. The mission is to get these 33 miners out. And actually, he said dead or alive. I looked at that and thought, if I was him, I would have just said, get them out. I wouldn't have said dead or alive, because I think that jarred. And the guy came in from Codelco, and they picked him because he had tremendous leadership qualities. He would tell his bosses what he really thought. He would listen. And what was really interesting was that the idea to penetrate the rock, it took them 17 days to drive the borehole through the 700 meters. People said it was impossible. It never could be done. And this guy from Codelco saw this, met this 23-year engineer who said, I have an idea. Young, inexperienced engineer. And that was the basis of where they managed to, the way that they managed to drill through the rock after 17 days. And the 33 miners were rescued after 77 days, I think it was, and successful. The lesson there is everybody can make a contribution. So listen to everybody. Don't, because of somebody's status, don't chuck the idea out. Everybody. So I think there's some really interesting lessons. I'm not saying that we've done this in an ideal way or we couldn't have done it better, but I think there are some basic fundamental sort of rules or ideas that emanate from that.
Look, I like the way you've put it, certainly in terms of putting people, the team, before all else, because everyone has something to contribute, unique. And again, it reminds me of a passage from the Ethics of Our Fathers, the part of the Talmud, that who is wise? Someone who knows they can learn from everyone. Everyone's got something to say. You just have to listen carefully. Look, so Martin, thank you very much for that, the fascinating insights, and also that good energy, if I may say, even though it's technology and it's not, it is not in the physical sense, but it is certainly a good way of communicating. And the good energy, I must say, with the emphasis on the good, comes out even though we're all watching on the screens. And we wish you much health, obviously, that comes before anything. Happiness and lots of success, and may you go from strength to strength. Just a few questions in closing. Where do you discover you've got this inner strength, you've got this optimism, dare I say, moving forward? Where do you get it from? How do you replenish it? What's the secret?
Well, I don't know where, we all have our moments, but I think the industry that we're in, every day, you have good things that happen and you have bad things that happen, and the trick is to make sure that the good things outdistance or outmaneuver, outpace the bad things. And I think to be in our industry, you have at heart to be an optimist. You can't. The glass has to be half full. Otherwise, you would never do. I would never have done half of what. And that's one part of it. I think the other part is, I take great. I think about who influenced me most, and it was my father. And I had other people. That when my father died in '89, I had a lawyer in New York called Bill Reese, who sadly died of cancer in the early part of this millennium. So he was with me, say, for another 15 or so years. Died at a young age, also of cancer, and. These were people, each of those were people that I could talk to who didn't have an agenda. I mean, Phil, actually, interestingly, was a lawyer, senior partner of the law firm that we used, Davis and Gilbert, New York. So there was a client relationship, but I could talk to him, as a surrogate, if you like, for my father. But with my father in particular, who I used to talk to, I don't know, this is before the days of mobile phones and even the clunky satellite phones. I would talk to him about 7, 8 times a day, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day, during the hostile takeovers, so-called, of JWT and Ogilvy and Mather. And, I could always talk to him. It wasn't that he knew stuff about the industry, But because he was a retailer, he had tremendous knowledge and understanding of people. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. If I would describe a situation to him, I won't go into the detail. There's one thing that sticks in my mind in particular, and I would describe individuals that I had to deal with or a problem I had to deal with, and he would give me a word or wording that would solicit an emotional response or a verbal response from the people that I was talking to when I actually went and talked to them. It was incredible. I mean, he had an understanding of human, maybe frailty, but human mind and emotion. Absolutely incredible. I mean, he literally could give me a word, and I would, if I said I was being interviewed by Joseph tonight, Dad, what can I say to Joseph that would elicit a certain response? He would give a word or a phrase that would get you to give me the response that I wanted. Incredible understanding. So that, I take a lot from that, actually. And my two regrets in my life. One is, I have many, but two in particular. One is that I never worked with him. We tried for half a year or so to work together. It was a complete disaster. And the second thing is that he never had his own business, because he would have been far more successful than me if I had been successful in doing that. And I think that's the tragedy. I mean, he came from a poor Jewish family. They came from, best as we think it was, the Ukraine, from Kiev in 1899. His mother and his father. His mother was a real balabuster. My Zeta was a little bit, I think, lazy. I remember, he had a pocket watch, and the snuff used to dribble down his beard. And he was, he wasn't, I think, the easiest man in the world. But my father was one of six and had to go out, as I said before, to earn a living, and never got an education that he gave me. And so I think, the answer to your question is that's where I get it from. And I get it from them. My mother's side were Polish and Romanian, but my father very much, I think, drove my thinking and developed my thinking.
I believe it was once as a guest on Desert Island Discs, they asked you about a book you would take on the island, and I believe you responded the Talmud.
Yes.
Can you tell us what's behind that?
Well, because my dad, I said to you before we came on air, so to speak, that my father could recite great chunks of Shakespeare, which for a kid from Stepney, second generation, but first generation born in the UK, was quite remarkable. The other thing that he could sort of recite great chunks of, just like you, is the Talmud. I mean, he would always, just like we've gone through this hour or so, and you've interwoven quotes or references to the Talmud, he would. And we didn't have iPads in those days. We didn't have computers. And you sat, in an Orthodox community, reading the Bible, reading the Talmud, and, by the way, reading Shakespeare. And he had an incredible memory too. I mean, I think I've got a good memory, but he had a memory that was just beyond belief. And so the reason is, if I was on that desert island, I would have a lot of spare time, which I haven't had in the lockdown. I thought I would get some, but I haven't. And, on the beach, I would read the Talmud. The other things I was given, I think you get given a Bible. I can choose the New Testament or the Old Testament. And then you're allowed one luxury. And mine was, I think it was a cricket bat and net and cricket ball. So, and maybe a bowling machine as well. So that's something. But the Talmud was basically because my father always used to go to it.
Well, this is this is probably the closest you'll get to being in seclusion and isolation as an island. But like, you don't have the time you thought you would get. But there certainly is some extra time, and maybe now is the time. Just a final question, a final couple of questions. What do you want your legacy? What legacy do you want to leave your children, grandchildren? As in, how would you like them to remember you?
Look, I think the I'd like to spend more time with them in that sense, because I haven't spent as much time as I should have done. And when I think back to my grandparents, I mean, you know, in a way, I would say that they would remember me as the way I remember my grandparents. My Bubba and my Zeta on my father's side, and my grandmother and my grandfather on my mother's side. No, I just think that they will think of me warmly, with affection, and maybe over my other years that I have, I'll develop a stronger relationship. But I think that's what I would like, to have a closer personal relationship.
And finally, on a macro level, do you think the world would be a better place post-pandemic? And if so, in what way?
Well, I'm worried about that. I'm worried about a couple of things. Firstly, I referred to the inequality that we've seen, the implications of that. I mean, I mentioned Ray Dalio, and he has a wonderful slide that sort of shows inequality. Well, one graph that shows how inequality has widened since the 1980s, since the Thatcherite, Reaganite eras, and he's worried about what happens to capitalism and the rise of populism is being driven by the increase in inequality. And the other slide he has, which is really interesting, is the rise and fall of currencies and empires. And it goes back to the Dutch florin, then pound sterling, US dollar, which is in decline, and the rise of the RMB, China. And of course, China 200 years ago was up and then went down, 200-year decline. They've been on the wrong side of history for 200 years. So I worry about both of those things, because I think it's going to drive countries into themselves. And he talks about this sufficiency. I mean, supply chains, for example, which have been completely threatened or decimated by the virus. You know, if people move production back to America because they don't want to rely on the Chinese or the Taiwanese or the Bangladeshis or the Pakistanis or the Indians or whatever it is, and vice versa, we're going to have a more fractured, fragmented world. So I worry that we will go more and more inward. We've seen it in the crisis. There is too little cooperation. I mean, it's not just President Trump and the US. I mean, the US, you know, has been going this way even under President Obama. I mean, it withdrew American influence even then. And I think that's a real problem. And China will fill the vacuum. I don't happen to think personally that if you look at history or look what's happened, apart from in their own backyard in the South China Sea, I don't think China is an aggressor, but they use soft power, particularly financial power, you know, low-cost loans for buying Chinese equipment or whatever it happens to be, or services. They use that very effectively. And as America withdraws, China fills the vacuum. So I'm really worried about the inequality part of it and the implications of that and populism and what happens. And I'm really worried about the two top dogs in the world. You know, just to remind you, 75 trillion of GDP, and the US is about 23, 24, China is about 12, 13, 14. So those are the two. They account for about a third of everything between them. And that's where the dogfight is. And the Americans won't accept the rise of China. And we have to work out some modus vivendi. I mean, the latest thing is, you know, with Trump, President Trump, renege on the investments, the debt that China holds. I mean, even a suggestion in the press recently that the president could do that technically and might do that as a part of the negotiations, in inverted commas, with the Chinese. So I think, you know, I really, really am worried about that. And I think the virus will stimulate that sort of concern. It's not going to dampen it down. The final thing is the cost of this stuff, this cost of this fiscal stimulus, which is huge, huge. I mean, Van der Leyen said 13 trillion euros just in the EU alone. I mean, God knows how much. I haven't seen a calculation as what the total stimulus is so far. Who's going to pay for that? So you talk about my grandkids and my relationship with my kids. They may end up blaming me for what's going on, because taxes are going to rise. I mean, corporate taxes are going to rise, income taxes are going to rise. But how else are you going to pay for this stuff? Have you already started to see it? I think it was in Pakistan or somewhere that people have started to raise taxes already to deal with the deficits. So we're going to see, I think, massive changes take place, and the role of the state. So this is the reverse of what we saw Thatcherite, Reaganite in the 80s. The role of the state is going to be enhanced, particularly by the actions that they took in the last few weeks. So I would say longer term, I'd be worried. So yeah, I don't know how long God will give me on this earth, but I think it's going to be tougher, Joseph. I hate to end on a gloomy note, but I think realistic. To fight our way out of this is going to be quite difficult.
So Martin, thank you so much for your fascinating insights on such a wide range of topics. And look, we wish you well, by the way, until 120 strong.
Please go.
Until 120 in Yiddish. Lots of health and happiness and much success. And please God, we'll all find the silver lining. And as you say, in your industry, it's all about looking at the half glass full. Please God, we should all try and remain as positive as possible. Just to end off, there's an expression from the third Lubavitch Rebbe who said, in Yiddish or in German, Trach gut wird sein gut, which means think good and it will be good. And Martin, continue in your positive way, and we thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And everybody out there, if there is anybody out there, anybody want to write to me, Martin at s4capital.com. I'd be happy to correspond with people. And last but most importantly, stay healthy and stay well, and your families too.
So Martin, thank you very, very much. Wonderful evening. Thank you again.